Welcome to what by my reckoning is episode 6 of Magical Mystery Talk, if you count the bonus episode that Desiree and Matt recorded last time on the 40th anniversary of John Lennon's assassination. So we've all been busy and a lot of water has obviously passed under the bridge since we were last together in December. I think we would have liked to have done a show more recently than this, but that's life and that's the world in 2021 for you. But we're here to set that straight today with an update on everything that's been going on in the Beatles-related world recently, and with, of course, a few delves back into past decades. So let's welcome back, as ever, Desiree, proprietor of TheNumberNine's blog.
Hello, hello.
Hello. And also Matt of the Occult Beatles and indeed Conspiro Media blog sites.
Hi there.
Okay, so yeah, we've left it a few months since the last one, and obviously there's lots to get through. I thought I'd just kick off with a topical one. One thing I wanted to mention before I hand over to you guys was Ringo's video message that he put out on New Year's Eve. This is the first show we've done since New Year's Eve, so the first chance to mention it, but he's appearing there with a face mask on in his own house. And he bangs the drum kit, takes the mask off, says, "Oh, I'll get rid of this now." And then he, puts his two fingers up and he's preaching peace and love, while complying with tyranny and the stripping away of basic, natural, God-given rights and freedoms. Very peace and love, that. But then I suppose there's a reason why Paul and Ringo are still alive and John and George aren't. And we get a little reminder of that every now and again. That's all I really wanted to say on it.
Yeah, I never saw that myself, this Ringo thing. So he's wearing his mask, so presumably it's
Well, pretty much, yeah. He's wearing his mask in his own house, so I suppose we're supposed to believe that he's filming it himself on his own phone, in which case there's nobody else around. But, sirs do as sirs do, and he is a recently crowned sir, isn't he?
Well, yeah, and another sir is Sir Paul McCartney, and it was in December 2020. He appeared on CBS Sunday Morning. I'm not from the US. It's a US show, so I'm presuming it's some kind of TV morning program, some kind of, that kind of a thing. And he was talking about masks on that particular show in December 2020. He was interviewed, and I've got the quote here. This is what he actually said. "I don't want to give it to anyone." So he's talking about the corona. "I don't want to give it to anyone. I don't want to get it. And when people sort of say, I don't wear masks, infringing on my civil liberties, I say, aha, no, that is stupid."
Right.
Yeah.
Who needs to quantify a statement when you're Paul McCartney?
I don't want to complain. I love the Beatles. But, Paul, drives me insane sometimes. He always has something to say about everything, and it's just that he drives me nuts. But yeah, when he's calling other people stupid, that's not cool. That's not peace and love. That's not Beatle-like. You're supposed to accept everybody for as they are, right? But then he is seen on vacation without a mask, on vacation while everybody else is locked down. So he has all of these privileges and he's calling people stupid, but he's the billionaire that gets to travel around wherever he wants and do whatever he wants.
Yeah, he was in St. Bart's in December, wasn't he, when the rest of us in the UK were under very harsh lockdown and couldn't go anywhere. Those rules don't apply when you're Paul McCartney, seemingly, and neither do masks.
And neither do they apply to his daughter, Stella. There is something else that Paul said regarding the corona, and it's to do with vaccines. Again, something that us guys aren't going to particularly enjoy. We're not actually going to agree with what he's saying. But with regards to masks, well, perhaps Stella McCartney is quote unquote stupid, because I know we're going to go on to this shortly. Stella appeared at the G7 summit this year, which took place in the UK this year, if I'm not mistaken. And pardon me if I'm wrong, but while the rest of us are effectively barred, or have been in the past, barred from getting on aeroplanes and going abroad, and even if we do get on an aeroplane and go abroad, we have to go through these stringent tests. In many cases, we have to quarantine in hotels, living under prison-like conditions. And here we had the G7 summit, where lo and behold, the world's so-called leaders are getting on aeroplanes and flying all over the place and just getting into other countries through airports, through customs, with no stringent tests, no quarantining, as far as I'm aware. If you actually look at some of the footage and the photographs of the G7 and how it was covered, none of them are wearing masks, including Stella McCartney. And there's no social distancing going on. So perhaps she's stupid as well. With regards to the vaccine, again in December 2020, in an interview for the BBC for a Radio 4 programme, I don't know if this is actually true. This is what I've read on the internet. I didn't actually hear the interview myself, but with regards to vaccines, McCartney said, "I will take the vaccine and I'd like to encourage people to get it too. There used to be," he said, there used to be anti-vaccine people. That was okay. That was their choice. But with the internet now, these things really take hold. And so you do get these people who won't take it. So effectively, reading between the lines, what I can see from that is he's not cool with that. He's not cool with people choosing not to take the vaccine over safety fears. I mean, that's the way I read that particular comment that he made back in December of last year. But
why was it okay pre-corona, and now that corona's here, it's not okay anymore to choose not to be vaccinated? Why is it? Why
COVID changes everything?
Changed, right?
Well, you see, what it is, Desiree, is God really fucked up by not creating vaccines instead of the stupid human immune system. You know, he really messed up that way. And he really messed up in not including face masks as part of our natural biology. But never fear, because Paul and his friends are there to put God's mistakes right. Phew, thank goodness for that. Yeah. Reminds me of a joke which is usually applied to Bono, but it could actually be applied to Paul. What's the difference between Paul and God? God doesn't walk around pretending he's Paul.
That's right.
I
think that probably applies.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, I have seen photographs of Paul walking around the streets with masks on. But then again, I've also seen pictures of him not wearing masks. So, and in the case of Stella, there she is at the G7 summit. No social distancing going on at all with the so-called world leaders. They're all standing right next to each other, and none of them, absolutely none of them, are wearing masks.
Even the bloody Queen was down there, and she's 96.
Right. And let's not forget, I mean, these are the world leaders. Like, supposedly, if they all got corona and died, you know, we would be just completely out of luck, right? We look up to these world leaders, supposedly.
Exactly. And if we're meant to be looking up to them, aren't they supposed to be setting an example and wearing these blooming things?
Exactly.
So,
it all makes you feel like, this is all kind of a farce.
Yeah, it feels like blatant mockery, doesn't it? But to be fair, they were elbow bumping instead of handshaking, so that made all the difference.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, whilst they're standing right next to each other with no masks on. Yeah, that's all right then.
And performing satanic rituals down on the beach.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That's how these people get down, isn't it?
I hope they're wearing their masks when they do that.
I'm sure they are. Eyes wide shut style. So shall we talk about Stella McCartney popping up at the G7 for some strange reason?
Yeah. I don't know what you've got to say about this, Desiree, but apparently what happened was at this year's G7, I think was it in June that it took place?
It was June in Cornwall.
Yeah, it took place in the UK, yeah. Apparently, I've got I've photocopied a news report here. Apparently, she was invited by Prince Charles to attend this year's G7. And according to this report I've got here, and I'm quoting from it here, for the first time in an official and important context, such as the G7, about 300 CEOs of the most important and influential companies in the world had the opportunity to meet with political leaders to discuss plans and objectives relating to the green question together. And this was Prince Charles's. Basically, this is what Prince Charles did. He gathered these people together to talk about the green question. Now, we know that Prince Charles is very vocal and very supportive with the whole green question. I should just point out, on a personal standpoint, I'm not one for, of course I want to save the planet, okay? I have a deep respect for nature. I don't want shit being sprayed all over the skies and us breathing it in. I have a respect for animal life. I have a respect for forests and nature.
Absolutely.
But we have to, as many researchers who've looked into this, especially in the alternative arena, have put forward, these so-called world leaders and these people such as Prince Charles, who also claim to be caring of the planet and claim to be trying to protect the planet by putting forward laws and regulations and so on, are they doing it because they literally want to save the planet and the people within it? Do they actually care about the planet, or is there a darker agenda at play? And is saving the planet, quote unquote, being used as an excuse in order to bring forward a dark agenda, a new world order agenda? And of course, if we're going to talk about agendas, what we're talking here about, of course, is to throw into the pot here, Agenda 2030. So with that in mind, we've got Stella McCartney here, who's a clothes designer, and she was asked to go along, and she did, to this G7 summit to talk about the green question as it stands with her with regards to the fashion industry. Now, my question is, did she go into this G7 summit with a genuine desire to want to save the planet? And by genuine, I mean she genuinely cares about the planet. Or is she going in there with this dark agenda? Now, if she's going in there with a genuine desire, there is the danger, of course, that she's going in there and she's going to get eaten alive, as it were. She's going to be manipulated into taking part in a malevolent new world order type of agenda without her knowledge. Now, what she said to the press, to the media, when she arrived at the G7, she said, "My goal," she said, "is to drive change and create lasting difference." Now, she claims that the fashion industry is one of the most polluting industries in the world. That's what she claimed. And what she said was, and she's talking with regards to the fashion industry, she says, "We have no laws or legislations that will put hard stops on the fashion industry." So basically, she wants the fashion industry to be policed. Now, that's all well and good, but look, I'm not a businessman, okay? Just from a personal standpoint here, and this is just an observation, okay? I'm not a business person, but I grew up, my parents were small business people, and my wife is a business person. She actually owns a fashion boutique. She runs a fashion boutique, and she also manages a restaurant. So, and also her brothers run businesses. My father-in-law and my mother-in-law run a business. So even though I'm not a businessman, I have grown up and then I have married basically into a family that are business people. We're talking small business people here, not huge, owners of conglomerates or what have you, but we're talking small to middle business people here. So people who genuinely need to earn money from their business in order to make a living, to eat, to get food on the table. So this is what I've grown up in. So even though I'm not involved in business, I've been in that environment. So from growing up, from childhood, I've listened to my parents talk about their business. I've listened to my wife talk about her business and my in-laws. So I have, even though I'm not a businessman myself, I have an understanding. I've seen how business has changed over the decades from childhood to now. And one of the things that I've noticed, and Desiree, you're a business person yourself, and you might agree with this. Certainly, this is the case in the UK. What I've noticed is over the decades, more and more regulations have been heaped upon the small business person. Mm-hmm. More regulations, more rules. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have to have some regulations in place, such as to protect the safety of a customer or a client, so they don't get injured or they don't get poisoned or whatever. But it's gone beyond that. From what I can tell, it's gone beyond that, and it's become a money-making and controlling exercise. You have to have a license. In the UK, if you're a small business person, you pretty much have to have a license for everything, okay? Yep. Whatever you want to do, you have to have a license for it. And if you don't have this license, the local council will shut you down. And with each of these licenses, there are heavy penalties to pay if you don't follow the rules. And in order to get the license, you have to pay a lot of money, hundreds of pounds in most cases, hundreds of pounds, sometimes on a yearly basis, in order to keep your business going. Now, this to me is almost like the Cray twins in the old days, going to a business and asking for protection money, basically saying, walking into a bar, for example, and saying, hey, if you don't pay us our protection money, you're going to turn up to your bar tomorrow and it's going to be burnt down. Yeah. It's just another form of
extortion.
It's a protection racket. So small businesses are being policed enough as it is. And Stella McCartney is claiming that the fashion industry is not being policed. Now, what she's doing here basically is she's asking world leaders, so-called world leaders, to police the fashion industry, which might be fine for the top end. But if you're a middle or small business person who owns a shop, how is that going to affect that person? Are they going to be able to trade anymore? Will they be able to afford to carry on? So she's treading on very shaky ground here. I'll just finish by just kind of fleshing out what she basically wants to happen. This is what she claims that she wants to happen. Now, she is a vegan. She's vegetarian, of course. I think she might even be vegan. And her clothes line, her brand, the Stella McCartney clothes brand, is basically driven towards that ethos. So the clothes that are made are vegan made, and they're made from recycled products. Now, what she said before, when she was interviewed at the G7, and you can find this interview, I think it's on Sky News, a UK news channel. You can find the actual audio for it, the video. What she's saying is that she wants to see the green question, quote unquote, being introduced into the fashion industry, because she claims that the fashion industry at the moment is resulting in a lot of trees being cut down needlessly. Also the issue of animal products being used for materials, not only the agricultural side of that, but also the cruelty to animals. But what she's saying is, in order to change the industry and for the fashion industry to go towards the road and for laws to be introduced, in order for that to happen and to encourage clothes designers and fashion houses to go the green route, they need to be incentivized. That's the word she used. They need to be incentivized. They need to be given incentives to do it. Otherwise, it's too costly for them to do it, and they might go out of business. For example, she used an example where she claims that for her to export vegan clothing, like fake leather, for example, she will be hit with something like a 30% tax. I think that's the quote she used. I think it was 30%. Let me just have a look. I've got the notes here in front of me, her quote. Yeah, she can be hit. She claims she can be hit by up to a 30% tax if she exports a non-leather good into the United States. However, if she was just to put, in her words, just a slither of pig leather into that material, she'd be exempt from tax. So what she wants is, in order to push the green agenda in the fashion industry, she's calling on these so-called world leaders to introduce laws that offer incentives in order for that to happen. But I will just say, it all sounds very noble, but I'll just finish with what I said before. She could be opening up a really, really ugly can of worms here, encouraging the fashion industry to be policed in a way that she will not want it to be policed, perhaps. And that will lead to the closure of businesses. But yeah, that's just my take on it. Desiree, I don't know what you've got to say.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? So right now, as it is, at least in my head, the way I see it, the products that she's talking about that are quote-unquote sustainable products, like mushroom-based leather, for example, right? That's like her big thing right now. If right now those things are sustainable and renewable, yes, but so is cotton, and so is pigs, and so are cows. I mean, yeah, you kill the animal, but they can have babies. They're still renewable in that sense. But if the entire industry worldwide goes towards these more sustainable, say, let's take, for example, the mushroom-based leather. If everybody goes to mushroom-based leather, is it going to be any more sustainable that way than, say, cotton, for example? They're still both plants. They still both need to be planted and harvested and fed and then made into these products. So I don't understand how one plant to be used for a product for mass producing is any better than another plant for mass producing. Either way, you're going to have huge farms. You're going to have, workers that are cutting them down and harvesting them and turning them into your product that you need, and weaving or whatever you do with a mushroom. I have no idea how they make it into a leather. But it just seems to me it's only sustainable right now because not a lot of people are using it. So that's why it's more friendly than, say, cotton. But if the entire industry starts going towards these more quote-unquote sustainable products, then it's going to be exactly the same. I don't understand how that's any different. And not just that, but if you start taxing the bigger garment-making manufacturers for doing whatever it is that they do that's deemed, not environmentally friendly, then, Stella McCartney herself is invested in these smaller, quote-unquote sustainable companies. And so, if they start going towards that line of work, she's going to be making a lot of money because she's already invested in these smaller type things that she's hoping will get bigger so that she could probably make more money.
Matt, you mentioned Stella's concerns about pollution there. And as far as I can see, one of the biggest forms of pollution right now is disposable face masks being discarded in the street in their millions. They're bloody everywhere. And it's interesting that the same groups and organizations that were decrying plastic bags ending up in the oceans and telling us all we shouldn't use so many plastic bags in the supermarket don't seem to have a problem with face masks being taken off and discarded all over the bloody place. And we now hear that Stella McCartney is putting out her own range of face masks. So making tyranny and communism cool.
Yeah. If you just type in Stella McCartney face mask into a search engine, you'll find a couple of websites where she's selling face masks. Yeah.
I mean, what's with Paul and Stella and Linda before them, all portraying themselves as caring for animals, being compassionate and kind, when they've all propped up so-called elite agendas all their careers? And when you think about Paul, in his career with the Beatles and through his solo career, he's been pushing satanic and mind control symbolism. With the Beatles, look at the Yesterday and Today infamous album cover with the babies and the meat, and there have been many others coming from the Beatles. And then you could point to many points in Paul's solo career where there's questionable symbolism. Even in Who Cares, his video from a couple of years ago from Egypt Station, it's full of mind control programming symbolism and triggers.
Absolutely.
So I have to ask myself, could they possibly be genuine and sincere in this compassionate stance that they appear to be taking? Do they have the capacity for that compassion within them? Or is it all smoke and mirrors and acting to portray an endearing public image so that they're more readily accepted by the public and they're then free to push their real agendas and messages, such as, in Paul's case, wear your mask and do what the government tells you?
Yeah, it's another way of thinking of things, Mark. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I've just always been suspicious of Paul's vegetarian stance because it just doesn't tally with other aspects of his personality.
He's also anti-fracking as well, which is, it's all mixed up, isn't it? He's very noble. There are very noble causes he supports, and then, like you say, there's this juxtaposition where he goes and does completely the opposite. Sort of. Don't know what's going on with this Stella McCartney thing, whether, as I said earlier, whether she actually attended this G7 summit in order to because she actually genuinely cares about the green question, or whether she's there to help push this Agenda 2030, with the whole sustainability, that lovely key word that these so-called elites love to ram down our throats in order to try and change our lives, And of course, Desiree, you make a really good point. She just could be there just as a cold, hard businesswoman.
Right.
She's ready to go down this green route. She's prepared. All her, all the cogs are oiled and well, poised to go down this route. So if anyone else loses money out of this, if any other business loses money from taxes and laws and policing as she wants, it will be fine with her because she's already ready to go with it because she's been preparing long before. So she'll be effectively one of the few people left in that field.
Right.
She'll have hardly any competitors. So
right, she'll be the leader in that. And she's that's exactly what she's pushing for. She's pushing for the big, companies that are not so-called environmentally friendly to, be taxed and be regulated, so that they're going to have a more difficult time being in business and staying in business. And then her businesses will climb to the top because that's, supposedly the future, that green way. That's the Agenda 2030. That's how it's going to be.
Yeah.
So she's already ready. She's thinking ahead. She's there. She just wants it to happen now.
So Mark, you might be correct, in your little sneaky suspicion, that little, that perhaps it's not all 100% genuine with the McCartneys with their green vegan agenda. Perhaps there is some hard cold business underneath some of that,
Well, call me cynical, but I've just been around the block a few times, seen a thing or two.
Yeah,
It reminds me, it's not just Paul McCartney that does this, of course. I mean, all these grizzled old rock stars are pushing agendas. Even Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. I know many truthers and alternative types think Roger is this great guy that's on our side, and certainly some of the things he says and does seem to indicate that. But just recently, I've got this going in my next book, Roger made some comments. Well, he's appeared with a face mask on, so he's given legitimacy to the whole COVID narrative by doing that. But also, he described Anthony Fauci as this wonderful guy. There's an interview that I've got where Roger says, thank God for Anthony Fauci, and all the great work he's doing. And he describes Bill Gates as a good person. So even though Roger has decried Zionist Israel's incursions on neighboring Palestine, that's been his major sort of cause, and he's won a lot of respect for that, he's still propping up and pushing other elite agendas in other places. And someone of his position that's been around the block as long as he has would know that COVID is a massive scam. And yet there he is playing along with it. So they all do it. And you just can't get to that kind of position, those kind of lofty heights, unless you're serving the hidden hand.
Look at Paul McCartney. Up until the lockdowns, he was constantly on tour, pretty much. Touring the US, touring Europe, touring the UK. So how many planes does he have to go onto? Presumably he's got some kind of private plane, I don't know. But, so he talks about saving the planet, but there he is going on these continuous tours.
Holidays as well. He was back holidaying in St. Bart's in March, so that would have involved a plane journey, wouldn't it?
And there's also a story, and this is going back a few years, and I always use this as an example when somebody poo-poos the idea of geoengineering and weather control, weather modification. I always bring this story up and copy and paste it into a chat forum or Facebook or whatever, just as quote unquote proof that these kind of things exist. Again, so if Paul McCartney cares about the planet, there's a story which you can find, and I think it happened in Russia. I think it was when he was playing in Moscow. I might be wrong about the actual location, but certainly on one of the tours he was on a few years back now, he appeared in concert, and there was the likelihood that it was going to rain that day, and it was an outside concert. So what they did, and I think this was in Moscow, I think, but don't hold me to that. What they did was they seeded the clouds to stop it from raining. So, for someone who cares about the planet and not messing with nature, he's quite comfortable with messing about with nature in order that he can get up on stage and sing, that.
Well, like I said, there's a reason why Paul and Ringo are still around. And I think in the last show, we speculated on what John and George would have made of the COVID narrative, didn't we? And I think we concluded that they'd both have not been able to bite their tongue. They'd have had to have said something about it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Especially John, I would think. I'm very curious to know what John would have been saying and doing at this point in time if he was still here.
Yeah, he wouldn't be silent, that's for sure.
No, I think him and Paul would butt heads a lot. At least it seems to me that they would. And maybe just privately, maybe not publicly, but I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I think John would say it publicly. He was always very critical of Paul in the press. Every time Paul brought a new album out in the 70s, John would be straight in there with his cutting remarks,
Right.
Yeah.
His eye rolls.
Yeah, calling him the Engelbert Humperdinck of pop. Yeah.
Other things that have happened recently then, we've had the birthdays of Paul, who recently turned 78, or 84 if you think he's really William Shepherd. And Ringo just turned 81. I think they were both. Ringo was the other day, wasn't he? July, and Paul was in June.
Mm-hmm.
Other things to talk about. Sean Lennon, John's son, of course, with Yoko, has been making a few anti-woke Twitter comments in recent times. So do you want to address that, Desiree?
Sure. I figure I would just read his entire tweet, which is actually really, really long. He really went off. I don't know what exactly sparked all this, but recently he took to Twitter and just really went off about the whole woke movement, if that's what you want to call it, quote unquote. But he started in by saying, when I was young, people used to say racist shit about Asians around me all the time, and then be like, oh, sorry, but you're not really Asian, so... And I think that they sincerely thought that this would make me feel better. I'm not exactly sure why I brought that up, but I think it's because I want to say I grew up in a time when there was zero political correctness. I literally saw political correctness being invented right in front of me at certain schools, and then distributed and eventually enforced as a mindset, as an ideology. I want to say that one night, one might have imagined at the time that the politically correct mindset and resulting implementation and enforcement would lead to a better society in which cultures and peoples were more integrated and more mutually understanding. But it is often the case that seemingly obvious solutions fail and even make matters worse. I often think that the terrible track record we have in science artificially modifying an ecosystem in order to rebalance a problem that we created, but ultimately wind up making things worse by creating bigger unforeseen problems. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we've been trying this kind of morality policing for a while now, and I would post it that things are arguably getting worse. Race relations seem to be in the middle of two steps back movement. If you are still reading this, congratulations. You have an attention span. I don't often talk about race, especially my own, and because I feel attention is like water in a garden. Whatever you give it to, it will grow. I pray this thread does not ignite some kind of meltdown. And if it does, I'll just delete because I have no more energy for that kind of thing. Okay, well, that's it. Peace and love to all. And I mean it. Oh, and just one more thing. Remember who benefits from the divide and conquer paradigm. It ain't us, that's for sure.
Again, all that sounds great and noble, doesn't it? But
it does.
We somehow have to reconcile that with the fact that Sean Lennon's artwork over the years has pushed lots of dark occult and satanic imagery. So how to reconcile these factors?
Okay, well, I'll throw some in, shall I? I don't know if you got these ones, guys, if you saw these ones. And this was to do, I think this was in August 2020. So if I'm not mistaken, this would have been right in the middle of the Black Lives Matter protests. Mm. So the whole cancel culture thing where certainly in the UK and the US, protesters were tearing down statues and defacing buildings that were connected to so-called historical figures who had links to the black slave trade and who were either alleged or were actually, indeed, factually, it can be proven, were profiting from from the black slave trade. So these were the the kind of things that were going on in the UK and the US, certainly. Statues of so-called historical figures who were connected or said to be connected to the slave trade, profiting from it, and also empire builders, British empire builders, because of course the British Empire was built on slavery to some extent. So So Sean tweeted, in amongst all of this going on, all these people tearing down these statues and defacing these buildings, and because of their so-called racist past, in August 2020, he tweeted, "I can't wait till Italy follows America's lead and starts cleansing itself of its fascistic past. First, it can dismantle fascist Mussolini-built Milano Centrale train station. Then it should demolish the Colosseum in Rome, since Emperor Vespasian was pretty problematic." It's quite amusing. He followed that up in October by saying, "The pyramids of Giza were made under coercion from evil pharaohs who were not very woke. I think we can all agree the pyramids should be torn down immediately." And in the same month, the same day actually, October 13th, he also tweeted, and this is last year, "Since the invasion of Britain by Emperor Julius Caesar in 55 BC, Italy has remained deafeningly silent. I think it's time Italy was held accountable." And another tweet, and I think this is from this year, he says, or he tweeted, "I'm very sad that I feel like I have to say the following, but here goes. Asians are not the problem. Blacks are not the problem. Jews are not the problem. And yes, whites are not the problem either. No race or culture is the problem." And finally, in May, he also tweeted, "I have lived in many cities and countries, and I can say from experience that there is an equal distribution of shitty people and good people in every human population. Most are good, some aren't great, and a very small number are clinical sociopaths you absolutely need to avoid." So that was his thoughts on BLM. And the whole tearing down of statues and defacing buildings from so-called historical figures with links to the black slave trade.
Right. So I think he was being, I figure he was being kind of sarcastic with most of those tweets. I don't think he really wants to, tear down the pyramids and all that. He was being,
exactly.
Making fun of it.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. Which is one of the reasons I found it very quite amusing, quite amusing tweets. It's almost John Lennon-esque in some, you can imagine him tweeting something along those lines with that kind of witticism,
Exactly. That's exactly it. And if you remember our, I think it was the podcast we did before, the episode we did before the John Lennon tribute one, we talked a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement. And we were talking about Penny Lane and all of that good stuff. And Paul had made a tweet about the Black Lives Matter, about George Floyd, who was, killed here in the U.S., which kind of sparked all of that.
Yeah.
And Paul was completely opposite of what Sean was saying. So it was almost like, Sean was kind of butting heads with Paul in a lot of ways in that manner. And that's what I was kind of saying the last segment, that I think that John and Paul would be very similar. I think Sean's kind of taking up John's role, as it were, and, just trying to do the opposite of what Paul is saying.
Well, can I mention just some other tweets? Because what I did was, having heard about these tweets that he'd posted regarding Black Lives Matter, I thought to myself, while I was looking at those tweets on his Twitter page, I thought to myself, let me just have a look at all his tweets. It took me a couple of days to do it, and so I was scrolling down the pages to see if I could find any other comments. I found the comments that you read out as well, Desiree, and I've got some other ones here as well from October last year, and this is to do with social media. And this is what he had to tweet about social media. Again, quite interesting. He tweets, "The media and corporations are collaborating to manipulate your reality." And then he adds onto that, "Some people will think those are right-wing talking points that I'm making there." Okay, so I'm paraphrasing there, which is, again, is quite an interesting little comment there. He then goes on to tweet in October again, a day earlier, "It is no longer exaggeration to say that the collusion between social media and media to manipulate our reality for the benefit of their political agendas has reached Stalinist proportions. In fact, Stalin's propaganda machine was relatively weak by comparison. Imagine if he had had control of social media technology. How would have things turned out then? What would our understanding of that history be today? It's scary to think about. And then somebody tweeted him a question with regards to these statements. The question was, do you think social media platforms are threatening democracy, Sean? Sean's reply was, and I quote, I honestly think they are threatening more than that. Our humanity is at stake because they are selecting for behaviors over generations that are destabilizing to our ability to create a cohesive society. It's artificial selection on hyperdrive. We are being irrevocably changed. Also worth noting that as I was looking at his tweets, I found a link to a podcast that he was a guest of now, and it was to do with none other than Max Kaiser, who is very well known as a journalist and reporter within the alternative media. And Max Kaiser very much pushes the Bitcoin agenda. And he's got this podcast, and I think it's called the Orange Pill Podcast. And you can find it on YouTube. There's a particular episode where Sean Lennon is the guest on this podcast with Max Kaiser. And during the conversation, Sean does mention the New World Order, and he also mentions the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum. So he certainly knows about that kind of stuff.
Does it seem more likely that Sean is genuine and sincere in putting across this kind of information rather than being put up to it as some kind of agenda?
I don't know. Think back to 1998. I thought I'd for the, you know, in preparation for today's podcast that we're recording, I managed to find the quotes that he made regarding John Lennon's assassination in 1998. He's reported to have stated, Sean is reported to have stated, John was a countercultural revolutionary, and the government takes that kind of stuff really seriously historically. Anyone who believes that Mark David Chapman was just some crazy guy who killed my dad for his personal interests is insane, I think, or very naive, or hasn't thought about it clearly. John was dangerous to the government. If he had said, bomb the White House tomorrow, there would have been 10,000 people who would have done it. These pacifist revolutionaries are historically killed by the government. I should just point out that you're not very pacifist if you're asking people to bomb a building, but there you go. Right. That's what he said. That's what he's reported to have stated back in 1998. So I don't know. The jury is out as far as I'm concerned, whether he's genuine or not. But
right, it's a lot like John Lennon too, right? We've gone back and forth on this on John. Was he part of the system, or was he really rebelling against the system? And it's really hard to define those lines. And I really feel that Sean has kind of taken up John Lennon's part in that. He's not as big and as popular, obviously, as John was or is still today. But he definitely has that Lennon-esque voice to where he, you know, says provoking things that make, you know, you're like, wow, you know, maybe he really is on our side. But yet, you know, he has all of that Lennon money too, and, you know, is very privileged, if you want to look at it that way, and has the name and has the money and all that. So who knows? It's kind of like, it's hard to define if, you know, if they're in on it or...
We seem to have a juxtaposition between Paul and John, because as I mentioned earlier, Paul is a system player. He's pushing elite agendas. Clearly, this is demonstrable. And yet he seems to come with the odd sincere message every now and again, such as with his compassion for animals and vegetarianism in this. And then with John
as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then with John and now Sean, you know, they appear to be anti-establishment. They appear to be on the side of the people. They're making what appear to be genuine and sincere statements. And yet they've got this dark occult kind of mind control symbolism in their artwork. John had it. Sean's got it. So none of it is clear cut. And you're left wondering whether they're genuine, whether they're being put up to these things. It's just so difficult to discern. There's so many conflicting messages going on.
Is it fixed opposition, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's a real thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It is. That's
gatekeepers, you know.
Yeah. If you can't beat them, then join them, right?
lead the people that are disaffected or feel disaffected and are looking for an alternative viewpoint and an alternative lifestyle, lead them down the cul-de-sac. Let's give them the gatekeepers. Let's give them a Sean Lennon, a John Lennon, dare I say it, you know, let's give them these figures who will lead them towards a dead end, if you like, you know.
A martyr.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if Sean or any of these celebrities had come out and blatantly claimed that COVID is a massive scam, that it's a huge hoax, that it's being used as justification for bringing in all these New World Order, you know, Agenda 2030, Great Reset measures, that would pretty much convince me that they're the real deal, more so than any other kind of statement. There have been very few celebrities that have claimed this. I mean, you know, Van Morrison's got about as close as any A-list celebrity to claiming that. I don't think he's actually come out and said COVID is a scam, but he's had a lot to say about government lockdown measures and how there's bad science being put out there and all this. So if Sean had come out and said, yeah, COVID is a scam, I'd probably be looking at him in an entirely different light.
And certainly, if he's aware of the Great Reset, what is the Great Reset at the moment, but part of the Corona COVID agenda? So
right.
If you know about the Great Reset, if you've done your research on the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum, you're going to know, and our friend Klaus, you're going to know about the Corona COVID connections to the Great Reset. So he will know this. Sean Lennon will know this if he's aware of all the other stuff like the Great Reset. He will know, and he will know about the claims that have been made about COVID and it being this false agenda, you know, this false scenario in order to push an agenda. He will know this. So by him not talking about it does make you suspicious. Yeah, it does make me.
And he would know. His mother is from a huge banking family. Of course he knows. You know, I mean, how wouldn't you know? He's about to inherit that money, you know? So,
now, what has Yoko had to say recently? Because she seems to have been very quiet about all things. I've not noticed any public comments she's made.
I've got a sneaking suspicion she's ill. She's not very well.
I do too. Yeah, I don't think she's very well. She's like 98 or something like that. She's really up there. And yeah, I don't think she's very well. I haven't heard much from Yoko at all. Just that their new release or re-release of the Plastic Ono Band set, but I don't think that those are her, you know, her promotions per se, personally, just her team's promotion.
So so she's, from what I understand, she's not very well, but that's just me reading between the lines, having seen her recently. Well, not seen her recently. She hasn't been, as we say, you know, she hasn't been about in public recently so much as she used to be. And when she is, she has looked rather frail. And as I say, I've seen her once or twice with a walking stick. So it could be that she's not too well at the moment. And that's why we haven't seen her. Yeah.
Right. Well, you mentioned there, Desiree, the re-release or a box set reissue of the Plastic Ono Band album from John and Yoko, co-produced by Phil Spector, who died earlier this year, 16th of January. So maybe we want to get into some of that.
Wow. Where do you start? Do you start with Phil Spector, or do you well, the thing is,
let's start with the re-release of the album, because that's going to be far easier than going into Phil Spector, and then we can take our time on him.
You think? Okay. Well, yeah, of course, as is the case with a lot of albums now from decades past. John Lennon Plastic Ono Band was released in 1970. It's been re-released in box set form, as I say, as is the case with a lot of albums from many years gone by. In recent years, a lot of these old albums have been re-released in box set form. They've got remastered track listings. They've been cleaned up. The sound has been cleaned up. You've got outtakes in there, unreleased demo tracks, and everything to do connected to the actual album itself. And the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band album, as I say, has been given that treatment. It was re-released this year, I think it was, earlier this year. And according to Yoko, she has said that the album is as a result of Primal therapy, which is a therapy that John went through. I think it was sometime around 1969, 1970. And as a result of that therapy, what came out of that therapy was this bunch of songs, which became the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band album. And this was John's first solo album outside of the Beatles. Of course, he'd released albums prior to that when he was in the Beatles, but this was his first solo album once the Beatles had split, and it was an album that he recorded with Klaus Voormann was on bass, Ringo was on drums, and there was an occasional piano accompaniment from Billy Preston. Of course, Billy Preston was the guy who famously appeared on the Beatles' rooftop concert in the Let It Be film, and he also plays the organ on Let It Be, I think, and also on Get Back. He plays the keyboards on Get Back as well, that little funky keyboard break. So that was basically John's band for this album. And Klaus, of course, is an old friend from pre-Fame Beatle days. He was there in Hamburg. He met the Beatles in Hamburg and befriended them there. He was an art student. And then once the Beatles became famous, Klaus came to the UK. I think he played in Manfred Mann, the 60s band, for a time. He played with them, and he also designed the cover for Revolver, of course. And yeah, and there he was in 1970 playing bass on this Plastic Ono Band album. So yeah, so basically, according to Yoko, the album was a result of this primal therapy that John went through. And what primal therapy is, according to the guy who, I don't want to really use the word invented it, because you don't invent these kind of things, do you? You formulate a theory and then an idea.
Right.
So he was the originator, basically, of this therapy, a guy by the name of Dr. Arthur Janov. And according to Dr. Arthur Janov, who passed away just a few years ago now, I think he was in his early 90s when he passed away. If you ever watch any interview or read or listen to any interview with Dr. Arthur Janov, he will always say that basically what primal therapy is, he'll give you like a detailed overview, but he'll also basically the basics of what it is. Primal therapy is going back to somebody's childhood and unlocking childhood traumas, because his theory is that people who have emotional baggage as adults are carrying something that happened to them as children, very young children, some kind of trauma that they will not remember, something that happened to them, something quite horrific that happened to them as children. And what happens is that the memory, because it's so traumatic, the memory will block that trauma. So the person who's gone through that trauma, that child, will not remember the trauma. So what happens is this adult will go through life with emotional baggage, depression, emotional issues, and it also, according to Janov, will also come through physically, high blood pressure, heart problems, perhaps cancer even. Certainly, John had a lot of baggage, as we know. When he was a child, he was born to a broken home, if you like. His mother effectively dumped him on her sister, his Aunt Mimi. He went to live with his Aunt Mimi and Uncle George from the time he was a baby up until he was 16, 17 years old. When he moved out of Aunt Mimi's home, he was effectively looked after by her. He was effectively dumped by his mother, and his father was never there. His father was a merchant seaman. His father, he may have seen his father maybe a handful of times before the age of 5 years old, and then after that he never saw him again up until John became famous, and then his father reappeared again. And the trauma, that's not the only traumatic thing that happened to John there, of course. Sometime around his teens, when he began to build a relationship with his mother again. And this was very important to John, because he looked up to his mum, and she was a bit like a trendy mum. She was almost like an older sister, because even though she was his mum, she used to listen to rock and roll, and loved Elvis and all this kind of stuff, Chuck Berry and Little Richard and what have you. And I think she actually taught John initially how to play the banjo, and from learning the banjo, that's where he learned to play the guitar. So he's got her to thank for making him what he became in terms of music. So there he is. He's building up this relationship with this woman who had basically shunned him for most of his life. And this is a woman he looks up to. And just as he's really, really beginning to gain this closeness with her, what happens? She gets killed. She gets run over by an off-duty police officer just yards away from Aunt Mimi's home. And this just...
How old was John when that happened?
I think he was about 17.
Yeah, I was going to say 16 or 17. Sounds right.
Because Paul lost his mum when he was 14, didn't he? So there's...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes.
Bit of a parallel.
This is a theme that you find, isn't it, with so-called mind-controlled pop stars.
Oh yeah, I mean, you've just described the mind control process there as it's employed within MK Ultra and Monarch programming and such. It's all about childhood trauma, which causes the mind to dissociate and bury bad memories.
Indeed.
And tuck them away in the recesses of the mind. What you just described there with primal therapy is, MK Ultra style mind control by any other name.
Well, that's it. It's trauma-based. It's trauma-based therapy. That's what it is. The difference being, of course, according to researchers, what happens with MK Ultra, what we've been told by various authors and people who claim to have been through it themselves as children, mind-controlled slaves, what happens is, and you'll correct me if I've got this wrong, but by and large what it is in summary is traumas are introduced to the child, and because, as I said earlier, the memory can't, the mind can't handle these traumas, the memory blocks them. So alter personalities, compartments begin to form in the brain, and in each compartment in the brain where each of these traumas are introduced and that are blocked by the memory, alter personalities are introduced, and then we have the mind-controlled slave. Now, what primal therapy is said to do is to unlock those memories, so you actually live the memory.
Right.
So perhaps it's a good thing that John went through this. What happened was, but I do say perhaps. So anyway, so he records, he went through this trauma, and it resulted in this album. Now he went through this therapy, and it resulted in this album. Now how he got into this therapy is I don't know how it happened, but I think Janov sent him a copy, and Yoko, of his new book, and this would have been 1969, around that time, his new book, which was called The Primal Scream, which effectively explained what primal therapy was. And John looked at this book and he thought to himself, wow, well, I've got so much emotional baggage, he thought to himself, I need to go through this treatment. So what happened was they invited Arthur Janov to come to the UK, where he began to treat John and Yoko in this primal therapy, and then they continued the primal therapy in the US. Now, as I said earlier, just a minute or two ago, it could be a good thing, potentially, that that his childhood traumas were unlocked. Maybe primal therapy is a good thing because you're opening the memory up and making the subject relive traumas that they never knew they had. So in a way, they're letting go of the baggage. They're opening the suitcase with all the shit in it, and just letting it all out. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that is a good thing potentially. Certainly lots of people who've been through it have claimed that it's done them a world of good. There are lots of people who've been through the therapy who claim it's a good thing. However, and this is the reason that we're talking about this today, however, there's a website that I've looked at. It's called primaltherapy.com. I'm not sure if this is the official website for the primal therapy treatments, but it certainly looks that way. It looks like a website that's bona fide. It's not somebody who's just copied and pasted loads of articles and put them on their own website and like an outside sourced website. It looks like it's been supported by people who work within primal therapy, actual bona fide doctors and psychiatrists, such as Dr. Arthur Janov. It looks like Janov may have even backed this website. Now, there's a section in this website, and this is where the however comes in. There's a section in this website where it actually starts with the headline, warning. And it states, and I quote, "This therapy is dangerous in untrained hands. Once people have been opened up to their pain, they are vulnerable to manipulation. A therapist who needs to control will control his patients." And there, if you get a chance to watch the documentary series Classic Albums, I don't know if you've heard of that documentary before. Basically, Classic Albums is this 1 hour documentary where each time they make an episode, it focuses on a quote unquote classic album. So one episode could be about Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, for example. And they did a particular episode where they looked at the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band album, which is regarded as a classic. And they spoke to Yoko. They also spoke to Ringo, who played drums on the album. They spoke to Klaus. They spoke to one of the engineers who helped to put the album together. And basically, it's a program where they talk about the making of the album, what spawned the reasons behind making the album in the first place, also looking at, you know, the nuts and bolts of each track and how they were created. And during this particular episode, they show an excerpt of an old documentary, and it looks like it's from the 1970s, and it's narrated by David Dimbleby. Anyone in the UK who will know who David Dimbleby is. He's an old BBC political reporter, if you like. Always covered the general elections that took place in the UK. He was always like the anchorman for that. He's like the top political honcho for the BBC. He's since left the BBC, but it shows in this Classic Albums documentary, it shows an excerpt of Janov's building where this therapy takes place, and it talks about and this is a quote from the documentary. It says, Dr. Janov claims his patients find their way back into their mother's wombs, and as it's saying this, it shows you this shot of a padded room with teddy bears all over the floor and in babies' cots, in babies' cribs. Now, what's quite disturbing about these babies' cribs in this padded room is that they've been damaged. They've got planks of wood nailed crudely across the cot, across the crib. It's like they've been demolished and rebuilt crudely with these brown, you know, disgusting looking planks of wood. Now, what does that suggest to you? Teddy bears, padded rooms, destroyed babies' cots. To me, that's something. It's like something out of a pop video, an MK Ultra Clues pop video, isn't it?
Right, like something off the Vigilant Citizen website.
Exactly. So this is the treatment room where John Lennon presumably may have even been treated himself. And there's also an article I found from Rolling Stone magazine. You can find this online, and it's an interview from back in the day, a few years back now, with Arthur Janov, and it describes a cell, a closet-sized padded copper-lined cell in this place where the therapies take place. And Arthur Janov is quoted as saying that this room also serves as a dungeon. He goes on to state 20 minutes in there, in the dark, with no sound and nothing to touch, and that's it. No more defenses. I hurt people, he goes on to say. I need access to the pain centers in the brain to get at the primal pains. So it's worth mentioning this stuff. You know, it is worth mentioning. And I'll just mention this also from the book, You Never Give Me Your Money, which is a great book, a Beatles book. You Never Give Me Your Money, The Battle for the Soul of the Beatles. It's by Peter Doggett. There's a quote in there from Klaus Voormann. And according to the book, Klaus claims that Ringo found the recording sessions for the album particularly disturbing. And Klaus Voormann is quoted as saying, and I quote, Ringo was very sad. And this is, don't forget, this is after the Primal therapy. This is when they're recording the album. Ringo was very sad. The old John had gone. It was a different John. It wasn't the old one he was used to. So make of that what you will.
Go figure.
So with regards to Arthur Janov, was John Lennon being mind controlled? Was he being MK'd with primal therapy? Certainly in a past edition of Magical Mystery Talk, I think it was episode 3, we talked about the time that Yoko brought in a hypnotist, so she claims, in order to
get him to stop smoking.
That was her claim. And this is according to John Lennon's extramarital girlfriend at the time, May Pang. She claims that Yoko, when John and Yoko had split, John had received this phone call some months after their split with Yoko saying, hey, John, come over. I've got this guy who can get rid of your smoking by hypnotizing you. And May claims that when he came back to her, to May, he was a different man, and the word that she uses is zombie, is one of the words that she used to describe John. And it wasn't long after that, maybe even hours after he returned to May, after this hypnotist session, he returned back to Yoko. So that raises some eyebrows with me. So certainly we've talked about John Lennon and mind control before, and I've looked at Dr. Arthur Janov at his background to try and find out if there's anything that links him to the CIA or to mind control. And I have to say, I found nothing. I haven't found much at all. The only thing that I've found, and this could be very tenuous, but I'll mention it very briefly. For a time, Arthur Janov worked for the Veterans Administration at Brentwood Neuropsychiatric Hospital in the US. It just so happens in 1969, a consultant was brought in to the Brentwood Hospital by the name of Lewis Joylan West. Now, Lewis Joylan West, and I hope I've pronounced his name right there, Joylan. I think that's how you pronounce it.
I think it's Jolly.
Is it Jolly, is it? Okay, my apologies. Jolly West.
Yeah, I know all about Jolly and West.
yeah, for sure. Indeed. So you'll know that he's been linked to MK Ultra.
He's an MK Ultra doctor, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So he was a consultant at this hospital that Arthur Janov worked at. But the thing is, and this is where it's tenuous, West was a consultant there from 1969 onwards, and I'm suspecting that by 1969, Janov might not have been working at the Veterans Hospital, Brentwood. He would have moved on by then, and he would have been fully dedicated to primal therapy with his own therapy rooms and his own organisation. So as I say, it's quite possible that they never met and they never knew each other, and that they actually never worked in the same building at the same time. But that's all I could find, basically. So I'll just add that in, that as something to consider. But with regards to the songs, Desiree, if you want to talk about the songs, these confessional songs that John put together as a result of his primal therapy.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're on the Plastic Ono Band album. There's a lot of very hard-hitting songs. And for example, Mother, which is, that's basically, I think, maybe what he actually did in primal therapy is kind of just a screaming stream of consciousness, yelling of sorts of all of his grievances about his upbringing by his mother and his father, and how they both let him down, and all of that. So that's a pretty it's always been a hard-hitting song for me. Every time I listen to it, it's like, oh, there's just something there, that rawness is just amazing on that one. And also I wanted to mention, I don't know how much you guys, I think you guys are pretty into the MK Ultra theories and things that people have said about it and whatnot. But, there supposedly a lot of few films and whatnot are supposed to, when a person who's been under the manipulation, the MK Ultra suggestive programming, certain films and certain scenes are supposed to stir their attention, right? One of those movies being The Wizard of Oz.
The main one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main one. And on the Plastic Ono Band, they re-released the album in 2000 and added a couple of tracks on there that weren't on the original album. And the original album, by the way, does have 11 tracks on it, which is an interesting number. That's one of those numbers that always stands out there. But on the 2000 re-release, they did two new songs. Well, one was Power to the People, like a remix of that one. But then another song that's on there is called Do the Oz, which wasn't on the original album, but I just found that to be very interesting. Do the Oz. So it was kind of like, he brought in that symbolism, even though it wasn't on the original one. Yoko, I imagine, decided to go ahead and put it on there. So anyway,
that was a B-side, I think, a B-side of one of his early singles.
Okay.
Yeah, it's to do with counterculture, so-called counterculture magazine in Britain, which was called Oz Magazine, I think it was called, which was going through a court case. I might have got that wrong. I seem to recall there was a profanity case to do with this countercultural magazine in London called the Oz Magazine, and John was kind of making a song in support of the magazine, with regards to this court case, which took place sometime in the late 60s, early 70s. I think the magazine was called Oz Magazine. One of these sort of countercultural newspapers that was out there for so-called hippies and the alternative scene, as it were.
Right. Well, interesting then, even if it's a countercultural magazine, that they would choose to use Oz as their title. I don't know. This interesting little tidbit that I wanted to throw in there. But pretty much all of the songs on that album are all very, they're simplistic, but yet very powerful and obviously trauma-based. If you really get into the Working Class Hero, that song is completely trauma-based. And, and again, it seems like John trying to get on the side of the people versus the side of the elite, and, trying to make himself more of a people's person rather than, on the elite side of things.
He's got a lyric in Working Class Hero, something along the lines of, they scare you to death till you can barely function, or something along those lines.
Exactly. That's a complete...
they dope you with sex, religion, and TV,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's another line.
Yeah. I think from all of that, I would rather just put up with the trauma than undergo the therapy, personally.
Well,
there's a lot of truths in the songs on that album, like I say, where he says they dope you with sex and religion and TV, which is from Working Class Hero, and that he talks about the school years and how they brainwash you at school and mold you into what you must become as an adult to serve the system, as it were. I'm just reading.
Could have been written yesterday, couldn't it?
Sorry?
Could have been written yesterday, never mind 50 years ago.
Indeed, it could be written 5 minutes ago. Indeed.
Exactly.
There's another line here which has got similar vein to it. This is from the song I Found Out. I've got the lyrics here. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. It's a mixture of basically in this song, he's singing about his primal therapy and what he feels and what he felt going through it, like personal feelings, and also about the reality of life. As he sees it, and part of the line in that song, he states, now that I showed you what I've been through, there ain't no Jesus going to come from the sky. Now that I've found out, I know I can cry. Some of you sitting there with your cock in your hand don't get you nowhere, don't make you a man. I heard something about my ma and my pa. They didn't want me, so they made me a star. So he's talking about the realities of life and getting through the bullshit of life and getting to the truth of life, pushing away the kind of like the fakeness of life and getting to the facts of life. And at the same time, he's also going on about his own therapy, basically, and what he feels and what the result of it was for him. But perhaps the most disturbing song is, I think it's the last song on the album, where it's just him. It sounds like he's recorded it on a tape recorder. And he hasn't cleaned the sound up at all. It's very, very basic, messy sounding. It's just him with a guitar, and it's "My Mummy's Dead." Mm-hmm. And basically the lyrics are, "My mummy's dead. I can't get it out of my head. My mummy's dead." And that's effectively, basically what the song is. It's not that long. It's quite disturbing to listen to, I think.
Very dark.
Very, very, very disturbing.
And we were talking there about the similarities between John and Paul in that they both lost their mothers in their teenage years. And it goes further than that, because I've just realized that both of them lost their fathers in 1976. They both died the same year. 1976 was the year that John went quiet in terms of his output. So he had some records out in 75. Then he wasn't heard of again until 1980. So he seemed to kind of become a bit of a recluse during those 5 years. Whereas Paul, I think I'm correct in saying he didn't turn up to his father's funeral, did he? Which has fueled some of these Paul is dead rumors and the idea that might not be the original Paul. But I think it's correct that he didn't turn up to his father's funeral, and instead he was on tour with Wings and releasing silly love songs and all this. But also, both John and Paul got married in 1969, and they both got married to women who had spent some time growing up in Scarsdale, New York, which I've mentioned before in previous shows. So many parallels there between the two of them. It's really uncanny.
The only point where there isn't a parallel is where John Lennon used to wear his heart on his sleeve. So he's singing in the song Mother that you mentioned, Desiree. There's the line where he screams out, "Mother, you left me, but I never left you. Father, I loved you, but you never loved me." He's wearing his heart on his sleeve, almost to the point where the audience perhaps gets a little bit annoyed by it, because it's like, perhaps they're thinking to themselves, "Oh, just shut up, John. Just, give it a rest. All right. We understand you're upset." Okay. Whereas Paul doesn't do that. He just, as you say, Mark, he just sings his silly love songs. It's complete opposites.
Right. It's like Paul doesn't have any emotion.
Yeah. And I also recall, and I don't know if this is true, but apparently, according to Denny Lane, who was in Wings with Paul, of course, he claims that he never even knew that Paul's father had died until Paul announced it at a press conference.
Right.
Paul just announced it on the microphone at a press conference to a reporter, and Denny Lane claims that's the first he'd heard of it. And these are meant to be buddies. These are Denny and Paul are meant to be bandmates, friends. Well,
this will only fuel the rumours that Paul was replaced, and that wasn't the real Paul, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, we've got a bit of time left, so we should probably get into Phil Spector, shouldn't we? I mean, where to even start with that guy?
Yeah, he was crazy.
Okay, well, basically, Phil Spector was brought in to produce the Beatles' Let It Be album, because it all went a bit pear-shaped. Basically, the whole plan of the Let It Be album in January 1969 was for the Beatles to get back to basics, because up until that point, from about 1965 to 1969, most of the Beatles albums, if not all of them, had been elaborate affairs. Lots of sound effects being used in the songs, orchestras, and overdubbing and sampling and all kinds of stuff. Electronic instruments, the early forms of electronic instrumentation were being used to make sound effects, and the productions were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At which point, in January 1969 or late 1968, Paul is reported to have said to the Beatles, "Hey guys, we need to get back to basics and just go back to how we were when we first started in the early 60s. Just be a basic rock and roll band playing basic rock and roll and blues, just 3 guitars and drums, no sound effects, no orchestras, none of that stuff." So that's what they started to do in January 1969. They got together to record what was going to be called the Get Back album. And they brought in a producer by the name of Glyn Johns. And he recorded the sessions, and he put together a prospective album, like a demo version of this album that he thought they should release and to be called Get Back. And the Beatles listened to this demo version of this prospective album. And then, of course, this became Let It Be, the film later on. This Get Back project was renamed Let It Be. So the Beatles listened to this demo and didn't like it, and it was put on the back burner. They weren't impressed. In the meantime, they went off and recorded the Abbey Road album in 1969, and that was their next album. And as I say, as they're doing this Get Back project has been put on the back burner, at which point the Beatles' then business manager, Alan Klein, brought in Phil Spector to salvage the sessions. And what he did, much to McCartney's consternation, was to take what was meant to be a Back to Basics album, and he transformed it into this thing with like strings and orchestras and choirs. I mean, there's the famous falling out between Paul and Phil Spector over the song The Long and Winding Road, which was meant to be, what McCartney wanted that song to be, was just him on a piano with guitar accompaniment, just a very basic song. And what Phil Spector did, and what he also did to Let It Be, and also to Across the Universe, John's song, is he put choirs all over it and all this lush orchestration, typical Phil Spector. Anyone who knows anything about Phil Spector's production style, that's what he did. He was all about the big sound. So there was a big falling out over this, and of course this became the Let It Be album. Not Get Back as a title was forgotten, and it became the Let It Be album and the film. After that, after he'd produced that, much to McCartney's consternation, Phil then went on to work with John Lennon. He produced his single Instant Karma, also Power to the People, also the Imagine album, Happy Christmas, War is Over, the single. And he also has production credits for John's so-called political album in 72, sometime in New York City. He also produced George Harrison's first solo post-Beatles album, All Things Must Pass, which includes My Sweet Lord, the song, the single. And he also gets production credits for Harrison's 1973 album, Living in the Material World. And this is worth the mention because basically what happened on that album was, and this became quite a habit for Phil Spector, he started not turning up to the sessions whilst the album was being recorded. And I've got a quote here, according to, and this is a quote attributed to George Harrison. Apparently what happened was Phil Spector got to drinking too much, which was another of his things, and he stopped coming to the studio, which was alarming George Harrison reportedly, because, you know, he wanted to get this album out. And this was around 1974, 73, 74 time, I think. So what happened was, and this is I've taken this from a quote which is attributed to George. Apparently what George did was he went to the hotel in London where Phil Spector was staying. He climbed on the roof because this was the only way he could get to Phil Spector, because he was trying to phone the hotel, and the hotel was like this protective wall for Phil Spector. He was using basically the reception desk as a wall to protect him from people trying to get to him, including George. So what George did was, reportedly, he went to this hotel, he climbed on the roof, and he got through the window where Phil Spector was. And he said to him, "Come on, man, you've got to finish this bloody album." And the way it's explained is Phil Spector then had to have about 18 glasses of cherry brandy before he could leave the room and go and finish the album and to work on the album. Now, he's got form for this because this is what happened with John Lennon. A few years later, well, actually not that much later, actually, Phil Spector was brought in to produce John Lennon's what became John Lennon's 1975 album, Rock and Roll, which effectively the reason that John Lennon recorded this album was because was due to the threat of a court case. What happened was in 1969, when they were recording the Abbey Road album, one of the songs on that album is Come Together. Now, there's the line in Come Together where he sings, "Here come old flat top, he come grooving up slowly." Now, that is very, very, very similar to an old Chuck Berry song called You Can't Catch Me, which effectively, you could argue, is a faster version of Come Together. So You Can't Catch Me came out years before. So there was this threat of a plagiarism court case, because in the Chuck Berry song, Chuck sings, "Here come a flat top, he was moving up with me, then come waving goodbye." So it's like a quicker version. It's even got some of the lyrics. And the publisher of this song, Maurice Levy, threatened Lennon with legal action. In fact, I think he even went as far as to try and sue John Lennon. And they eventually came to an agreement where instead of going through this costly court case, John agreed to record a whole album of for the publisher Maurice Levy to record a whole album of rock and roll covers. So that would basically, I think, reading between the lines, that would help Maurice Levy, you know, make some money from John Lennon's effort.
Maurice Levy was a gangster, wasn't he? Part of the Jewish mafia.
Exactly, he was. And that's the reason I'm mentioning him now. It doesn't have much relevance to what we're talking about, but I will mention very quickly that Maurice Levy was the man who put together Roulette Records, which most famously had housed the singer Tommy James, who recorded the songs Mony Mony and I think We're Alone Now as well, which was later covered by Tiffany in the 1980s. Anyone who can remember that. And according to Tommy James himself, and also the FBI, as far as I'm aware, also the FBI, Roulette Records was actually funded by and a front for the American mafia, and in particular, the Genovese crime family. And Tommy James has said this himself. And in fact, in the late 1980s, Maurice Levy was sentenced to 10 years in prison for extortion. him and another individual who was linked to the Genovese crime family were charged with trying to extort a record distributor. Very basically, what happened was they got into Levy had got into a deal with this record distributor where Levy was going to sell him all this old stock, these old records. This record distributor claims that Maurice Levy had skimmed some of those records from the top. He'd basically taken the best records and taken them away from the deal, kept them for himself, and then tried to sell this distributor all the rubbish, all the crap. And this guy wasn't having it. This distributor wasn't having it. And what happened was, he claims that this man from the Genovese crime family who was also found guilty, beat this record distributor up and threatened him into taking these records and paying for them. And it amounted to a couple of $1 million or something. So, this is the kind of guy Maurice Levy was. So here we are. We've got this album that John is recording, this rock and roll album. And what happens in the middle of it? Lo and behold, Phil Spector does a George Harrison on him. He runs off. Not only does he not turn up anymore, he runs off with the master tapes. He takes the master tapes with him and locks them up in his mansion. And John Lennon actually talks about this in one of his final ever interviews. He talks about he's phoning Phil Spector at his mansion and saying, "What's going on, Phil? What's going on?" He goes, "I've got the tapes and you can't have them." You know, paraphrasing there. He's not giving them to him.
Right.
So they had to drop everything. John Lennon had to drop everything. He couldn't carry on with the sessions. So he went off and recorded his next album, which was Walls and Bridges. And in the meantime, the vice president at the time of Capitol Records, which was the American label for John Lennon, went through a series of meetings and discussions with Phil Spector in order to get these tapes back. In the meantime, Maurice Levy's banging at the door saying, "Hey, come on, where are these songs you promised me? If you don't get these songs out, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to take you to the cleaners. I'm going to take you to court." So there's all this stuff going on. Eventually, what John had to do was, they did get the tapes back in the end, but what John had to do as well was go back in the studio and re-record most of the album. Eventually it came out in 1975, and it was the rock and roll album. And we haven't even got into Phil Spector's love of guns, which was also something that was going on with John, allegedly. If you want me to mention that, I mean, it's. I mean, of course, we know
he was bringing them into the studio, right?
That's right. That's what's claimed to have happened. Let's not forget that Phil Spector died earlier this year in jail following the shooting of Lana Clarkson, I think her name was, a sometime movie actress. He was charged with her murder. He was said to have walked out of the mansion after the shooting with the gun in his hand. This is according to a witness. This happened at his mansion. He'd picked her up at a nightclub, basically. She was a nightclub hostess, a sometime actress and a nightclub hostess. And he brought her back to his mansion. And a witness claims that he saw Spector walk out of the mansion with the gun in his hand saying, "I think I've killed somebody." He then later changed that story and claims that Lana Clarkson was the victim of a quote unquote accidental suicide. What she'd done was, he claimed she'd kissed the gun, in his words. She'd kissed the gun and then she fired it, and it went off in her mouth. And it wasn't his fault, basically, but he was found guilty anyway, and he was put away. I think it was a life sentence or something. But he's got form for guns. Blondie star Debbie Harry is reported to have said that she was in discussions with Phil Spector a few years back about recording with him. And to quote her, I've got the quote here. She says, "He pulled out a gun, that notorious thing he does. He stuck it in my boot and then said, bang. At which point she thought, get me out of here. I just want to go home. Just get me the hell out of here." So that's
pretty unlucky, isn't she, Debbie Harry? Because she's also talked about getting into a car with Ted Bundy inadvertently.
That's right, yeah.
And narrowly escaping. So, yeah, she doesn't have the best of luck when it comes to getting into cars with people.
Don't take your boots off. Also Leonard Cohen. Phil Spector produced his Death of a Ladies Man album in 1977. Cohen, he claims, this is what he said. He said, Phil approached me with a bottle. This is in the studio whilst they were recording this album. Phil approached me with a bottle of red wine in one hand and a .45 in the other. He put his arm around my shoulder and shoved the revolver into my neck and then said, Leonard, I love you. To which Leonard said, I hope you do, Phil. But yeah, we've mentioned May Pang already earlier on, and according to May Pang, John was involved somewhere in all this gun business. In actual fact, the person that she names who saw Phil messing around with the gun wasn't John Lennon. It was Mal Evans, who, as we know, Mal Evans was the long-time roadie of the Beatles. From their days back in Liverpool, and even after they'd stopped touring, he became kind of like their sideman, their gopher, if you like. He was like their to-do man. Anything that the Beatles needed to be done, he would do it for them, running errands and what have you. And then after the Beatles split, he hung around with various, sometimes with Ringo, sometimes with John. And there's this instance that May Pang claims when Mal was with John Lennon in the studio, and she talks about a particular incident where there was some kind of argument between Mal and Phil Spector. According to an interview with May Pang, she claims that Phil irritated Mal Evans one night in the studio to the point that Mal got so irritated that they began to argue. And Phil didn't take kindly to this, according to May. Phil didn't take kindly to this at all, because Mal was just saying to Phil, please stop. Just stop and stop being annoying. Stop irritating me. Just go away. At which point, Phil reached for his gun and it went off. And John Lennon is also quoted as saying that whether this is true or not, this is actually a quote that's in a book, but I'm not sure if John actually did say this or whether it's one of those things where people are quoting people just willy-nilly, whether it's an actual quote from John or whether someone's made it up. But I'll mention it. John Lennon is reported to have said that he was in the studio once and Phil Spector fired his gun into the ceiling, I think it was. And John is quoted as saying, listen, Phil, if you're going to kill me, but don't fuck with my ears because I need them. And that quote is attributed to the book. It's attributed to John and featured in the book, Baby, You're a Rich Man Suing the Beatles for Fun and Profit. And there's also another quote that's attributed to John. And again, I don't know if this is a real quote. I can't actually find the real source of it. All I can find is other sources using this quote, but I can't actually find John saying this in an interview. I can't actually find an article where he says it or a video or whatever. But apparently, reportedly, according to John, and this is particularly cruel, what Phil Spector did was he pulled a gun on Stevie Wonder. And what happened was he didn't even tell Stevie Wonder that he had a gun pointing at him. So you got this guy who's blind, who's got a gun being pointed at him, and he doesn't even know it. Just bizarre. But there's an ironic twist, isn't there, when you think of Mal Evans, John Lennon, Phil Spector. I mean, the ironic twist being that each and every one of them, their lives were destroyed, brought to a close, ruined by the shot of a gun.
Absolutely.
Mal Evans, it wasn't that long after this reported incident took place in the studio with Phil with the gun. I think it was about a year or two after that. He was shot dead by police in an incident in his motel room, I think, in the US. And then, of course, John got shot, killed. And then you've got Phil Spector and the incident with Lana Clarkson. So there's a rather... I don't know if this is relevant at all, whether we should mention this about Spector, but around the time that the shooting occurred, or just after the shooting occurred, and it was reported in the press, he had a set of adopted twins. He'd adopted some twins who were 6 years old back in the early 70s, I think it was. And around the time that that he was arrested for the shooting of Lana Clarkson, some reports came out from these twins, from these two boys, and also from another child who was adopted by Phil Spector. He'd actually adopted twins and also another child by the name of Dante. And there were some reports that came out in 2003, as I say, just after he'd been arrested for the shooting of Lana Clarkson. Now, I don't know how reliable these reports are, because I've only managed to find them online on web forums or on websites. I haven't been able to find the actual real source. They're attributed to the Mail on Sunday, which is a newspaper in the UK. It also has the Mail Online, which is a website, a news website. It's attributed to that newspaper, but I haven't been able to find the original article. As I say, all I've found is copy and pastes of this article, but I haven't been able to find the original Mail on Sunday article to check whether this is true or not. So it's also been re-reported. It was picked up by the New York Daily News as well, reportedly as well. Now, according to this report, and this came out in 2003, Dante, who was not one of the twins, he was the adopted son of Phil Spector, not one of the twins, but Dante and one of the twins were reported in the press in 2003 as claiming that Spector had kept them locked up when they were children, held captive, and check this out, forced to perform sex acts. There's the claim that Dante, when he was 9 years of age, was forced to perform, and I quote, simulated intercourse with one of Phil Spector's girlfriends at the time. And he was handcuffed and blindfolded. That's what Dante claims. And one of the twins, by the name of Gary, meanwhile, was reported as saying similar, and that he was, quote unquote, sexually molested. And when he approached Phil Spector, his adopted father, and said to him, "Why are you doing this?" Spector is reported to have said, "Don't worry, it's a learning experience." So, as I say, this is a report which is claimed to have appeared in the British press back in 2003, although I can't find the original source for it. Shortly after those claims were made, however, this should be pointed out, Gary, who was one of those who was reported to have made the claims, issued a denial, claiming, and I quote, "I was never brought into any room with unknown women, and I was never forced." And he also claims that our life was rough at times, sure, but we don't need reporters making it sound even worse for the sake of ratings. And that denial is featured in the book Phil Spector, Wall of Pain by the author Dave Thompson. So I'll just mention that as well, okay, to close the Spector subject there, the topic all about Spector. Make of that what you will.
So all you budding musicians out there who are desperate to make it into the industry and really want to be a part of things, this is what you're missing out on. So you're probably better off where you are. Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's a price to pay.
Exactly.
Yeah, and interesting.
Just ask Paul. Just ask Ringo.
Too. Right.
All right. Well, some fascinating information in today's show. We'll be needing to do another one in December this year to mark the 20th anniversary of George Harrison's passing. Right. Maybe we'll squeeze another show in before then. Be good if we could. But if we don't manage it in these crazy times, then we'll certainly be back at the end of the year. We'll try not to leave it so long next time. So, Desiree, Matt, thanks for jumping on today. And you just want to remind the listeners where they can find your blogs and any new articles to mention really briefly.
Okay, I'm working on a whole bunch of things as usual, but not progressing very far as usual. But everything I have is on my blog site, TheNumberNine blog, and hopefully some new content will come out there pretty soon, but not anytime really soon.
With regards to the Occult Beatles, WordPress.com, lots of articles to come this year, and they won't be long in coming. They'll be posted quite soon in the next month or two. And I'm also in conjunction with my website Conspiro Media. I'm at the moment putting together a series of podcasts which I hope can be made into radio shows, so I can actually play music in these shows. A series of shows all about gangsterism in the music industry in the 1960s and early 1970s through to the late 70s. And we talked about Maurice Levy earlier. Certainly he is going to get mentioned. So this is something I'm putting together at the moment, a series of radio shows, just a one-off series, maybe 4 or 5 episodes, which I'm hoping won't be a podcast, but will actually be a radio show, a series of radio shows.
Get Don Arden in there, Sharon
attached.
Osbourne's dad.
Exactly. Don Arden will have to get mentioned. Sharon Osbourne's dad, of course. Also Mike Jeffries, who was Jimi Hendrix's manager and also manager of the Animals, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And many others. Wilf Pine, the Cray Twins. Yeah, it's something that I'm working on at the moment. I've pretty much written the script for it, although a lot of it will be done off the top of my head, improvised. But so if anyone listening has a radio station, an alternative radio station, and they're looking for something along those lines, please feel free to get in touch, because I would love to sync my show to your station. That would be great. But as I say, I will be having music in this show as well, hopefully. Music attached to the subject matter. So, yeah, busy.
All right, great. We'll put your email address in the show notes for anyone that wants to get in touch with you.
Thanks,
other than that,
very much.
Catch you next time, guys.
Cheers. Cheers, Mark. Cheers, Desiree.
Yes, it was a good one. Thanks, guys.
It was.